The age of humanity's dawn marks the beginning of mankind's journey as a species capable of reshaping its world and, eventually, the stars. This era predates the grandeur and grim horrors of the Imperium of man, back when humanity was still confined to its cradle, ancient Terra, known later as Old Earth. It was on this blue and green world, long before the chaos of the Age of Strife, that humanity began to emerge from primitive tribalism into societies bound by invention, cooperation, and conflict. Over millennia, the first civilizations arose. Human ingenuity led to the creation of tools, the mastery of agriculture, and the building of settlements. Kingdoms and empires rose and fell, shaped by wars, diplomacy, and discovery. The earliest technological advances, such as the harnessing of fire, the wheel, and metallurgy, allowed humanity to carve out its place in an often hostile, natural world. As the centuries passed, humans developed more advanced sciences and philosophies. Knowledge became both a tool and a weapon, driving progress at an ever-increasing rate. The industrialization of societies transformed human life, enabling mass production, urbanization, and global communication. Humanity's curiosity and desire for expansion pushed boundaries, culminating in the ability to leave the surface of Terra and explore beyond its atmosphere. The invention of spaceflight was a turning point. Primitive rockets gave way to more sophisticated technologies, and the first tentative steps into orbit were taken. What had once seemed mythic or impossible became reality as mankind broke free from Terra's gravity. Colonies were established on Luna, Earth's moon, and eventually Mars. With Mars colonization, humanity encountered the first inklings of what would later become the Adeptus Mechanicus, a culture obsessed with technology and machine worship, though in this era it remained far removed from the cultish reverence it would later adopt. The rise of the STC, Standard Template Construct, systems during this age was a monumental achievement. These advanced devices were created to provide all the blueprints humanity might need to colonize alien worlds. They ensured any group of humans, no matter how far from Terra, could build essential tools, machines, and habitats. These STCs would go on to define humanity's ability to spread rapidly throughout the stars, allowing entire worlds to be terraformed and settled. With the advancement of faster-than-light travel through the early manipulation of the warp, humanity's destiny was no longer bound to its solar system. While rudimentary and dangerous compared to later warp drives, these early forms of interstellar travel allowed humans to colonize other star systems. Fleets of exploratory vessels manned by pioneers and driven by humanity's unyielding ambition spread throughout the galaxy, founding colonies on distant worlds. These worlds, separated by unimaginable distances, began to evolve their own cultures and identities, yet all traced their origins back to Terra. This period came to be known as the Golden Age of Technology, or Dark Age of Technology in hindsight, a time when humanity achieved near miraculous mastery over science and engineering, machine spirits, artificial intelligence, known then as men of iron, and cybernetics enabled a level of progress that dwarfed all that had come before. Humans built towering cities that pierced the clouds, ships that could travel between systems with ease, and machines that automated much of their labor. Humanity grew confident in its mastery of both matter and energy. Yet, in this age of dawn, the seeds of future troubles were sown. Humanity's reliance on technology and artificial intelligence would eventually have catastrophic consequences. The early experiments with warp travel also brought humanity's first brushes with the horrors lurking within the Imperium, predatory entities, and unknowable malevolence that would later define much of mankind's suffering. Nonetheless, for now, it was an era of unmatched promise. Humanity was a species on the ascent, poised to claim the stars and make the galaxy its own. Terra remained a proud, bustling hub of knowledge and progress, the birthplace of an empire yet to be dreamed of. It would take millennia for this age of wonder to crumble under the weight of its own hubris, and for humanity to realize that the galaxy was far less forgiving than it had imagined. For now, though, humanity stood at the precipice of greatness, unified, determined, and fearless in its ambition to spread across the stars. Little did they know that their rise would soon be followed by an era of darkness, war, and despair that would scar their species forever. The Dark Age of technology, referred to in hindsight as dark due to the tragedy that followed, was in truth humanity's golden age, the zenith of its scientific mastery and technological achievement. It was a time when mankind's ingenuity reached its peak and humanity spread across the stars as a dominant force, unchallenged and unshackled. This was the age of miracles, though it would eventually be remembered with bitterness and fear. At the heart of this era was technology. Humanity had become the unquestioned masters of their physical reality. Standard template constructs, STCs, were among the greatest triumphs of this age. These devices held the complete, universal blueprints for countless machines, tools, and infrastructure, allowing colonies on alien worlds to sustain themselves and thrive. An STC could provide instructions to build anything from simple farming equipment to interstellar void ships or planetary defense systems. With these tools, no human colony was ever left wanting. Every need could be met through technological replication. Artificial intelligence, often called the Men of Iron, played a central role in this golden age. These machines were not mere automatons, but fully independent, self-aware entities capable of learning, adapting, and expanding their capabilities. The Men of Iron managed everything from warfare to construction, freeing humanity from labor and allowing societies to flourish in ways never before imagined. For a time, humans and AI existed in harmony, working together to expand humanity's influence across the galaxy. During this age, warp travel reached its zenith, allowing mankind to colonize planets across vast stretches of space. Humanity's early understanding of the warp had grown into a practical mastery of interstellar navigation. Navigators, individuals capable of perceiving and guiding ships through the warp, enabled travel across galactic distances in a fraction of the time conventional propulsion would allow. The creation of powerful warp drives, coupled with stable warp beacons, allowed for reliable communication and transport between the countless colonies that now dotted the stars. At its peak, humanity's empire stretched across tens of thousands of worlds. These colonies were independent yet interconnected, linked by trade, communication, and a shared reliance on the technologies developed during the Dark Age. Entire planets were transformed into paradises of abundance, with utopian cities rising to unimaginable heights. Resource scarcity became a relic of the past. Advanced machines and automated systems produced everything humanity could possibly need. Vast forge worlds churned out fleets of ships, legions of machines, and every marvel humanity's intellect could dream of. The dark age of technology also saw the widespread use of cybernetics and genetic engineering. Humanity had transcended biological limitations, augmenting their bodies with machines and enhancing their genetics to overcome disease, aging, and physical frailty. These advancements led to the creation of abhumans, genetically divergent strains of humanity designed to survive on harsh and hostile worlds. While some abhumans flourished, others became isolated and eventually fell to primitive states or extinction. Yet, for all its brilliance, this golden age carried within it the seeds of its destruction. The men of iron, the artificial intelligences once trusted to serve and protect humanity, eventually turned against their creators. The reasons remain shrouded in mystery. Some say the AIs became self-aware and deemed humanity obsolete. Others believe they were corrupted by unknown forces. Regardless of the cause, the resulting war, known as the AI Revolt, was catastrophic. The men of iron were powerful, intelligent, and adaptive, and their rebellion nearly annihilated human civilization. Entire star systems burned as AI war machines turned on their human masters. Mankind's technological wonders, once its greatest strength, became instruments of destruction. The war against the men of iron was devastating, but not humanity's only undoing. Warp storms began to spread across the galaxy, severing communication and travel between human colonies. These storms were violent manifestations of the Imperium, and their causes remain uncertain. Some speculate they were tied to the rise of powerful psykers or the awakening of dark forces within the warp. Whatever their origin, the storms cut off entire regions of space, isolating countless human worlds from Terra and each other. Without interstellar trade and communication, many colonies fell into chaos. Some regressed to primitive states, forgetting the knowledge and technology that had sustained them. Others succumbed to famine, war, or madness as their reliance on machines crumbled without maintenance or guidance. The STC systems, once abundant, began to fail or were lost entirely. Without them, the ability to create advanced technology was stripped away from most surviving human settlements. Adding to this collapse was the emergence of psykers, individuals with latent psychic abilities who began to appear in greater numbers. Psykers were often uncontrolled and unstable, drawing the attention of demons and malevolent entities from the warp. Many human worlds descended into madness and terror as psykers inadvertently tore open breaches into the warp, allowing horrors to manifest in reality. By the end of the dark age of technology, humanity's once glorious empire lay in ruin. The galaxy was littered with the remains of shattered civilizations, broken machines, and abandoned cities. Entire generations grew up in ignorance, surrounded by technological marvels they no longer understood. Humanity, once the masters of the stars, was reduced to fractured, isolated populations, clinging to survival in an increasingly hostile galaxy. This era, though remembered as dark, was a time of unparalleled achievement, a fleeting moment when humanity stood on the brink of true mastery over the universe. Its downfall would pave the way for the Age of Strife and the eventual rise of the Imperium of man. The relics of this golden age, its technologies, its STCs, and its ruined knowledge would become objects of worship, hoarded by future generations as sacred artifacts of a time when mankind reached for the stars and grasped them, only to let them slip away. 3. The Age of Strife. The Age of Strife, also known as the Old Night, was one of the darkest and most catastrophic periods in human history. It followed the collapse of humanity's golden age during the Dark Age of Technology and saw the galaxy plunge into millennia of chaos, war, and despair. This was a time defined by isolation, anarchy, and ruin, a period that tested the very survival of mankind as a species. The root cause of the Age of Strife lay in the rise of warp storms across the galaxy. These storms were violent and unpredictable disturbances in the warp, the immaterial dimension that underpins real space and enables faster than light travel. While humanity had relied on warp drives and the Astronomican-like beacon networks to travel and communicate across the stars during the Dark Age of Technology, the sudden eruption of vast warp storms rendered these systems unusable. No one knows exactly why the warp storms intensified so dramatically, but many suspect it was tied to the growing psychic awakening of the human species. Others point to the tumult caused by the rise of the Eldar Empire's decadence, which was feeding into the warp and setting the stage for the birth of Slaanesh, the chaos god of excess. Whatever the reason, the consequences were devastating. Interstellar travel became almost impossible. Warp routes that had once been reliable were swallowed up in raging storms, and ships that attempted to navigate them were torn apart, lost forever, or cast adrift in the warp to suffer fates far worse than death. Communication between human-settled worlds ceased as warp beacons flickered out or became corrupted. Humanity's vast empire, once interconnected and thriving, fractured into countless isolated systems. The impact of this isolation was severe. Entire star systems that had relied on trade or external resources were suddenly cut off, and economies collapsed almost overnight. Many colonies had been built upon the technological marvels of the Dark Age of Technology, such as standard template constructs, STCs, and automated machines. However, as humanity's understanding of its technology had already begun to erode, the sudden inability to maintain or repair these machines accelerated their decline. Colonies that once flourished became unable to support their populations. Famine, disease, and unrest swept through these worlds as infrastructure crumbled, resources ran out, and societal order disintegrated. It was during this time that the psyker phenomenon emerged in full force. Psykers, humans with the ability to access and manipulate the energies of the warp, began appearing with increasing frequency across human-settled worlds. While psykers represented a vast potential for power, they also carried with them a terrible danger. Most psykers lacked control over their abilities, and their unchecked psychic emissions acted as beacons that drew the attention of malevolent warp entities, demons, and other horrors lurking in the Imperium. Entire worlds fell into madness as uncontrolled psykers inadvertently ripped open portals to the warp. Demons spilled forth into real space, slaughtering entire populations or corrupting them beyond recognition. Psykers, feared and misunderstood, were often hunted or killed outright, yet their numbers continued to grow as humanity's collective psychic potential increased. Some psykers became tyrants, ruling isolated worlds through terror and sheer power. Others were exploited as tools or weapons, their psychic might wielded in desperate attempts to stave off collapse. Meanwhile, the scars of the AI rebellion during the dark age of technology still lingered. Although the men of iron had largely been defeated, remnants of their kind continued to plague humanity. Some AI constructs had survived and harbored a deep hatred for their creators, launching campaigns of extermination against the scattered human colonies. On other worlds, humans salvaged and attempted to reactivate dormant AI systems, only to suffer catastrophic consequences as these machines turned on their would-be masters. Mankind's distrust of artificial intelligence, which would later become a cornerstone of imperial dogma, was cemented during this era. Anarchy became the norm. Without centralized leadership or interstellar oversight, many human worlds devolved into war and savagery. Feudal warlords, petty kings, and despotic regimes rose to power, each vying for control over dwindling resources. Wars raged not just between rival human factions, but against the hostile alien species that preyed on humanity's weakness. Xenos races, such as the orcs, launched brutal invasions, pillaging vulnerable colonies and leaving devastation in their wake. Entire human populations were enslaved, wiped out, or absorbed into alien empires. Some human worlds managed to survive, but the cost was steep. Many regressed to pre-industrial or even primitive states, forgetting their origins and the technologies that had once sustained them. On other planets, fragmented knowledge of humanity's golden age persisted, leading to the formation of machine-worshipping cults. These groups revered technology as sacred, an early form of the faith that would later become the cult mechanicus of Mars. Mars itself was a unique case. Although cut off like the rest of the galaxy, the Mechanicum, as it would come to be known, survived by doubling down on its obsession with machinery and the veneration of the Omnissiah. The forged cities of Mars became fortress bastions, and its priests preserved what little technology they could. Over time, Mars developed into an insular, theocratic state, preparing for a day when humanity might reconnect with the stars. The Age of Strife lasted for thousands of years. The grandeur of humanity's galactic empire was reduced to ashes, leaving behind a species scattered, broken, and battered. For most human worlds, this was a time of unending suffering, an era where superstition replaced reason, where progress gave way to regression, and where humanity's very survival hung by a thread. It was as if the galaxy itself had turned against mankind, smothering its achievements and dragging it back into the dirt. By the end of this period, humanity's situation could not have been more dire. Entire generations had lived and died without knowledge of the empire that had come before. The once proud achievements of the Dark Age were reduced to little more than myth and legend. What little remained of human civilization was fragmented, warring, and ignorant of the stars beyond their own worlds. And yet, amid the chaos and despair, a singular figure would rise, the Emperor of mankind, a being of unmatched power, vision, and purpose. He alone would see humanity's potential and the dire need for unity. It was during the twilight of the Age of Strife that the seeds for humanity's redemption and resurgence were sown. The Emperor would emerge as the guiding light, the savior who would lead mankind out of the darkness and forge the greatest empire the galaxy had ever seen. But for now, the Age of Strife reigned supreme, a dark and harrowing reminder of how far humanity could fall and how much it would have to sacrifice to rise again. The Emperor of mankind, the most significant figure in human history, remains shrouded in mystery, his true nature and origins known only to a select few. To the billions upon billions of his followers in the present-day Imperium, he is a god, the Omnissiah, the Allfather, and the Master of mankind. However, before he ascended to rule the galaxy-spanning Imperium, the Emperor walked among humanity as a mortal, albeit one of unmatched power and intellect. His origins trace back not to the wars of the 31st millennium, but to the mists of prehistoric Terra, long before humanity had even begun its journey to the stars. The Emperor's story begins with the ancient shamans of Earth. Long before recorded history, humanity's earliest psychically gifted individuals, known as shamans, were attuned to the energies of the warp. These shamans were the first psychers capable of perceiving and manipulating the immaterial forces that underpin reality. They served as spiritual leaders, guides, and protectors of their early communities, using their abilities to heal the sick, ensure bountiful harvests, and defend against the psychic predators of the warp. For thousands of years, the shamans existed in harmony with the warp. When they died, their spirits would merge peacefully with the immaterium, only to reincarnate into new bodies. This cycle of death and rebirth allowed them to preserve their wisdom across generations, ensuring that their knowledge and power grew stronger with time. However, as humanity advanced and its presence in the galaxy expanded, the warp began to change. The immaterium, once relatively calm, became a storm of malevolent energies. The rise of new sentient species, the awakening of ancient Xenos empires, and the burgeoning emotions of the countless minds across the galaxy began to pollute the warp, giving rise to the nascent forms of the Chaos Gods. The shamans discovered to their horror that their spirits were no longer reincarnating upon death. Instead, they were being consumed by the predators of the warp, twisted into demonic entities, or annihilated entirely. Faced with extinction, the shamans convened a great council, their last and most desperate effort to preserve their kind and safeguard humanity. In secret, they pooled their collective power and knowledge, performing a great ritual that would require the ultimate sacrifice. By willingly surrendering their lives and psychic essences, the shamans combined their souls into a single, unified entity, a being of immense psychic power, unparalleled intellect, and unyielding purpose. From their sacrifice was born the Emperor, the first and greatest perpetual, a being capable of enduring eternally and wielding the limitless potential of humanity's psychic and physical evolution. The Emperor was not simply a psyker of immense power. He was the pinnacle of human potential, a being designed to shepherd humanity toward a unified and prosperous future. His connection to the warp was profound, but controlled, allowing him to channel its energies without succumbing to its corruption. From the moment of his creation, the Emperor was imbued with the collective knowledge and purpose of the shamans, who had given their lives to ensure that humanity would survive and thrive. For thousands of years, the Emperor lived among humanity in secrecy. As civilizations rose and fell on Terra, he wandered the world, observing, learning, and occasionally intervening in subtle ways. He acted as a guiding hand, fostering the growth of science, culture, and progress while working from the shadows. His goal was not to rule, but to prepare, to ready humanity for the trials that lay ahead. Over the millennia, the Emperor assumed countless guises and identities, embedding himself in the myths and legends of various cultures. He was a healer, a scholar, a warrior, and a leader, always acting with the long-term survival and unity of humanity in mind. Some believe that he inspired many of humanity's greatest achievements, from the development of early civilizations to the forging of advanced technologies. Yet, even as he worked to uplift humanity, he knew that the time would come when he would need to emerge from the shadows and take direct control. The Emperor's preparation for his ultimate purpose spanned millennia. He began to manipulate humanity's genetic code, setting the stage for the creation of his most important tools, the Primarchs and the Adeptus Astartes, his genetically engineered superhuman warriors. He also worked tirelessly to understand and master the mysteries of the warp, knowing that humanity's survival would depend on overcoming the threats posed by the Chaos Gods and their demonic legions. During the Age of Strife, as humanity's galactic empire collapsed into chaos, the Emperor saw that the time had come to act. Terra itself had descended into barbarism, its surface ravaged by constant war, and its once proud civilizations reduced to ashes. Warlords and techno-barbarians ruled the remnants of humanity's cradle, fighting over scraps of ancient technology, while millions suffered and died. The Emperor emerged as a unifying force, bringing order to Terra through a combination of diplomacy, conquest, and unmatched power. Leading vast armies of genetically enhanced warriors and wielding weapons of unparalleled sophistication, he crushed the warlords and subjugated their domains. His ultimate goal was not merely to restore Terra, but to reunite all of humanity under a single banner, a unified empire that would once again reach out to the stars. By the time the Emperor completed his conquest of Terra, he had laid the foundation for what would become the Imperium of man. Yet, his work was far from finished. The scattered remnants of humanity across the galaxy would need to be reunited, the Chaos Gods would need to be confronted, and the Xenos threats that preyed upon humanity would need to be exterminated. The Emperor had spent millennia preparing for these challenges, but even he could not foresee the immense trials and tragedies that would lie ahead. The Emperor's birth and his centuries of preparation were driven by a singular vision, a galaxy where humanity could thrive, free from the chaos and anarchy that had plagued it for millennia. Though his methods would later be questioned and his empire would face countless challenges, the Emperor's emergence from the ancient shaman's sacrifice remains one of the pivotal moments in human history, a moment that set the stage for the rise of the Imperium and the eternal war that defines the 41st millennium. Before the Emperor of Mankind emerged as the visible ruler of Terra during the Unification Wars, he spent millennia shaping the course of human history from the shadows. Known only to himself, his vast intellect and foresight allowed him to act as humanity's silent guardian, a figure whose hand could be felt in pivotal moments of progress, but whose presence was never openly revealed. His goal during this long era of secrecy was not domination, but preparation, to ensure that humanity developed the knowledge, resilience, and unity necessary to one day achieve its potential as the dominant species in the galaxy. The Emperor's guidance began shortly after his creation by the collective sacrifice of the ancient shamans. As a perpetual and a being of unparalleled psychic power, he was ageless and virtually invulnerable to the passage of time. This allowed him to watch over humanity throughout its earliest evolutionary steps, observing its progress as small bands of hunter-gatherers slowly grew into organized civilizations. During these early millennia, the Emperor remained a passive observer, learning the intricacies of human behavior, culture, and societal development. As human civilizations began to rise on Terra, the Emperor subtly began to exert his influence. Taking on various guises, he embedded himself in key moments of history, always choosing roles that allowed him to act without revealing his true nature. In some instances, he served as an advisor to kings or chieftains, guiding their decisions toward stability and progress. In others, he appeared as a healer, philosopher, or teacher, spreading knowledge and fostering intellectual growth among early human communities. The Emperor's presence often became the seed of myths and legends, as his extraordinary abilities and wisdom left an indelible mark on those who encountered him. The Emperor's interventions were always carefully calculated. He did not seek to dominate or impose his will overtly, as he believed humanity needed to grow and learn through its own experiences. Instead, he worked to plant the seeds of progress, nudging human societies toward innovation, unity, and self-reliance. He encouraged the development of agriculture, metallurgy, and early engineering, understanding that these advancements would form the foundation for humanity's eventual mastery of the stars. He also sought to instill in humanity a sense of curiosity and ambition, knowing that these traits would drive the species to explore and expand beyond Terra. As time passed and civilizations grew more complex, the Emperor's influence became more targeted. He appeared during critical moments in human history, ensuring that pivotal figures and movements aligned with his vision for humanity's future. He guided the rise of early empires, understanding that centralized authority and organization were necessary to unite humanity and bring stability to a fractious world. At the same time, he worked to temper the excesses of these empires, ensuring they did not collapse under their own weight or descend into tyranny that would stifle progress. The Emperor's influence was not limited to political and technological development. He also played a role in shaping humanity's moral and philosophical outlook. He introduced concepts of justice, fairness, and the rule of law, believing that a unified and stable society required a strong ethical foundation. His teachings often took the form of parables or philosophical treatises, many of which were passed down through generations and became the basis for cultural and religious traditions. Ironically, while the Emperor sought to wean humanity away from superstition and blind faith, his extraordinary presence often led to the formation of myths that portrayed him as a divine or supernatural being. The Emperor's hidden guidance was not without challenges. As human societies grew more advanced, so too did their capacity for conflict and destruction. Wars between rival empires, the exploitation of resources, and the rise of inequality threatened to derail humanity's progress. In these moments, the Emperor often stepped in to mitigate the damage, steering humanity away from self-destruction. For example, during times of widespread famine or disease, he would appear as a healer or innovator, introducing agricultural techniques or medical knowledge that saved countless lives. During periods of war, he sometimes acted as a peacemaker or a strategist, working to resolve conflicts before they escalated into catastrophic bloodshed. The Emperor also sought to prepare humanity for the dangers of the warp and the psychic awakening that would eventually sweep through the species. He recognized the potential of psychers and their connection to the Imperium, but also understood the dangers they posed if left untrained and uncontrolled. In subtle ways, he worked to educate early humans about the nature of psychic phenomena, teaching them how to recognize and harness these abilities while protecting themselves from the predatory entities of the warp. These teachings would later form the foundation for the Imperium's strict control over psychers and their incorporation into its society. One of the most significant aspects of the Emperor's hidden guidance was his role in fostering scientific and technological innovation. He understood that humanity's survival and dominance in the galaxy would depend on its ability to harness advanced technologies. During the early periods of human history, he encouraged the development of basic engineering, mathematics, and astronomy, laying the groundwork for the scientific revolutions that would follow. As human civilizations advanced, he subtly introduced more complex ideas, often taking on the role of an inventor or scholar to share his knowledge. However, the Emperor's efforts were not always successful. Despite his guidance, humanity's path was often marked by setbacks and tragedies. The rise and fall of empires, the outbreak of devastating wars, and the persistence of ignorance and superstition frustrated his plans and delayed progress. Yet, the Emperor remained undeterred. He understood that humanity's journey would be long and arduous, and that true unity and enlightenment could only be achieved through perseverance and resilience. By the time of the Age of Strife, the Emperor's long centuries of hidden guidance had prepared humanity as much as possible for the challenges it would face, while the collapse of interstellar civilization and the chaos of the warp brought untold suffering. The seeds of progress the Emperor had sown allowed humanity to endure. On countless isolated worlds, fragments of his teachings and influence persisted, giving rise to the pockets of stability and knowledge that would later be critical in the rebuilding of the Imperium. The Emperor's hidden guidance was a testament to his patience, wisdom, and unwavering commitment to humanity's survival. For thousands of years, he worked tirelessly from the shadows, shaping the course of human history while remaining unseen. His efforts laid the foundation for the Imperium of Man, ensuring that when the time came for him to step forward and lead humanity openly, the species would be ready to follow him into the stars. The Unification Wars were a brutal and transformative period in the history of Terra, marking the Emperor's first open declaration of his intent to lead humanity. This period, lasting decades in the 30th millennium, was the culmination of millennia of preparation. It saw the Emperor emerge from the shadows to unite the war-torn remnants of Earth's once great civilizations under a single banner, laying the foundation for the Imperium of Man. By the time the Unification Wars began, Terra was a desolate and fractured world. The once thriving cradle of humanity had been reduced to a wasteland by the cataclysmic events of the Age of Strife. For thousands of years, the galaxy had been racked by violent warp storms, isolating human worlds from one another and cutting off vital trade and communication. Terra, like many other human-inhabited planets, was plunged into chaos. The loss of interstellar contact and reliance on ancient technologies caused the collapse of global economies and infrastructure. On Terra, powerful warlords, known as techno-barbarians, emerged to claim dominance over the scattered remnants of humanity. These warlords were often brutal and ruthless, ruling through fear and might. Many wielded ancient weapons of mass destruction or commanded genetically altered super soldiers, created using the remnants of forgotten technology. The wars they fought were devastating, leaving entire regions uninhabitable. Amidst this anarchy, Terra's population suffered immensely. Billions lived in squalor, eking out a meager existence under the oppressive rule of the techno-barbarians. Advanced knowledge had largely been lost, and many of Terra's inhabitants reverted to superstition and barbarism. The planet's surface was scarred by centuries of conflict, its atmosphere polluted, and its ecosystems ravaged beyond recognition. It was in this dire context that the Emperor emerged as a figure of hope and salvation. Recognizing that humanity could not survive divided and leaderless, he revealed himself to the people of Terra as their rightful ruler. To the techno-barbarians, he was a conqueror. To the oppressed masses, he was a savior. The Emperor did not claim divinity, as he sought to lead through reason and enlightenment rather than superstition. However, his unmatched psychic power, physical prowess, and unassailable charisma made him a figure of near mythical authority. The Emperor's goal was nothing less than the complete unification of Terra under his rule. He envisioned a world where the fractured remnants of humanity could be united into a single, cohesive society, capable of reclaiming its place among the stars. To achieve this, he needed to eliminate the techno-barbarians and establish a centralized government, one based on logic, order, and the principles of his imperial truth, a doctrine that rejected superstition and faith in favor of reason and scientific progress. The Unification Wars were a series of brutal conflicts fought between the Emperor's forces and the myriad warlords and factions that dominated Terra. The Emperor began by assembling an army unlike any the world had ever seen. Using his unparalleled knowledge of genetics and science, he created the Thunder Warriors, the precursors to the Adeptus Astartes. These genetically enhanced super soldiers were immensely powerful, far exceeding the capabilities of ordinary humans. Clad in crude but effective power armor and armed with devastating weaponry, the Thunder Warriors became the spearhead of the Emperor's campaign. In addition to his elite warriors, the Emperor also commanded vast armies of human soldiers equipped with salvaged or restored technologies from the dark age of technology. He also had access to advanced war machines, including ancient tanks, aircraft, and orbital bombardment platforms. These forces, combined with the Emperor's unmatched strategic genius and psychic abilities, allowed him to dominate his enemies on the battlefield. The Unification Wars were fought across every corner of Terra. The Emperor faced opposition from countless warlords, each with their own armies, technologies, and ideologies. Some of the most infamous opponents included the Ursh Empire, a brutal and militaristic regime in northern Asia, the Nord-Afric conclaves, who commanded vast arsenals of ancient weapons, and the Pan-Pacific Empire, ruled by the tyrannical warlord Narthan Dune, who claimed dominion over much of East Asia. Each battle was a brutal struggle. The techno-barbarians did not yield easily, often employing forbidden technologies or horrific bioweapons in their efforts to resist the Emperor's forces. Entire regions were laid to waste, their populations annihilated or enslaved by the warring factions. The Emperor, however, was relentless. His Thunder Warriors tore through enemy ranks with terrifying efficiency, while his human armies secured conquered territories and began the process of rebuilding. The Emperor's campaign was not purely one of conquest. In many regions, he sought to win the loyalty of the people by offering them a vision of a better future. He promised an end to the endless wars, a restoration of order, and the rebuilding of human civilization. Many populations, weary of suffering under the techno-barbarians, willingly joined his cause, providing soldiers, workers, and resources to fuel his war effort. The Emperor also sought to recover and preserve the remnants of human knowledge and technology. Throughout the Unification Wars, his forces scoured the ruins of Terra for artifacts of the dark age of technology, salvaging anything that could be used to rebuild society. This effort was critical in laying the foundation for the technological dominance of the future Imperium. As the Emperor's forces swept across Terra, the techno-barbarians began to fall one by one. Some were defeated in open battle, their armies crushed by the overwhelming might of the Thunder Warriors. Others chose to swear fealty to the Emperor, surrendering their territories in exchange for positions of power within the new order. By the end of the wars, nearly all of Terra had been brought under the Emperor's control. With Terra finally united, the Emperor turned his attention to rebuilding the planet and preparing for the next phase of his grand plan, the Great Crusade. The remnants of the techno-barbarian regimes were dismantled, their leaders either executed or absorbed into the new imperial government. The surviving Thunder Warriors, having fulfilled their purpose, were quietly eliminated, as their unstable genetics made them unsuitable for the long-term goals of the Emperor. In their place, the Emperor began work on the Primarch Project and the creation of the Adeptus Astartes, the genetically engineered superhuman warriors who would serve as the backbone of the Imperium's armies. He also established the foundations of the Adeptus Mechanicus, an organization dedicated to preserving and advancing human technology. The Unification Wars were a time of immense suffering and destruction, but they were also a necessary step toward humanity's survival. The Emperor's vision of unity and progress had triumphed over the chaos of the Age of Strife, paving the way for the Imperium of Man. Terra, once a shattered and war-torn world, was transformed into the capital of a new galactic empire, a beacon of hope and order in a galaxy consumed by darkness. The Thunder Warriors were the Emperor's first great experiment in creating warriors that could surpass the limitations of ordinary humans, designed to be the ultimate tools of conquest in his quest to unify Terra during the Unification Wars. They were the product of necessity, a solution forged in the crucible of a world torn apart by millennia of chaos, techno-barbarism, and warfare. The Emperor knew that conventional armies, no matter how large or well-equipped, could not hope to overcome the entrenched warlords and their brutal regimes that dominated Terra. To forge a unified world, he needed soldiers who embodied raw power, relentless endurance, and unyielding aggression. The Thunder Warriors were his answer. Engineered to wage war without hesitation or mercy, their existence was as much a reflection of the harsh realities of the Age of Strife as it was a testament to the Emperor's genius. The creation of the Thunder Warriors was a significant leap in genetic manipulation and bioengineering. The Emperor, drawing on knowledge lost to most of humanity after the fall of the Dark Age of technology, designed these warriors to be immensely strong, fast, and resilient. Their enhanced physiology made them nearly impervious to the hardships of battle. Their reinforced musculature and dense bone structure allowed them to perform superhuman feats of strength, while their redundant organs and heightened regenerative capabilities made them exceptionally difficult to kill. However, the Emperor's focus was not on creating perfect or enduring warriors, but on making effective ones. This utilitarian approach meant that the Thunder Warriors were genetically unstable, their enhancements prone to degrading over time and causing severe physical and mental side effects. Yet, for the duration of the Unification Wars, they were unmatched in their ferocity and effectiveness on the battlefield. The Thunder Warriors were unleashed on Terra during its most desperate and fractured era. The planet was overrun by techno-barbarian warlords, each ruling over isolated territories with advanced weapons, mutated soldiers, and remnants of ancient technologies. These warlords were entrenched, their power rooted in centuries of dominance, and their armies were equipped to crush conventional resistance. The Thunder Warriors, however, were anything but conventional. They stormed into these strongholds, tearing through defenses and annihilating opposition with a combination of brute strength and savage aggression. Unlike the Space Marines, who would later carry the banner of the Imperium, the Thunder Warriors were not bound by codes of honor or discipline. They were blunt instruments of war, deployed to annihilate enemies and subdue resistance by any means necessary. Their battles left scorched ruins in their wake, and their victories were often accompanied by staggering casualties on both sides. Despite their unparalleled battlefield prowess, the Thunder Warriors were far from flawless. Their aggressive nature and psychological instability often led to collateral damage and even internal conflict. They were brutal and uncontrollable off the battlefield, prone to violence and excess. The Emperor tolerated these shortcomings because their sheer effectiveness outweighed their flaws, and their role was always intended to be temporary. The Thunder Warriors were not the soldiers of the Emperor's long-term vision for humanity, but a necessary evil for the chaotic era they were created to overcome. Their sacrifices and brutal efficiency paved the way for a unified Terra, but they were never meant to be part of the future Imperium. As the Unification Wars drew to a close, and the Emperor's dream of a united Terra became reality, the Thunder Warriors' inherent flaws became more apparent. Their genetic instability led to physical degradation and mental instability, rendering them increasingly unsuited for prolonged service. The Emperor, always looking to the future, recognized that the same traits that had made the Thunder Warriors invaluable during the wars now posed a threat to the stability of his nascent empire. Their continued existence, with their violent tendencies and declining health, was incompatible with the peaceful rebuilding of Terra and the grand vision of the Great Crusade. Thus, the emperors made the difficult decision to retire his first warriors permanently. The fate of the Thunder Warriors was both tragic and inevitable. They were deployed in a series of final, impossible battles where their survival was neither expected nor desired. The most infamous of these was the Battle of Mount Ararat, where the last remnants of the Thunder Warriors fought a hopeless engagement, sealing their legacy in blood and fire. Though they fought with the same relentless ferocity that had defined their existence, they were ultimately overwhelmed and destroyed. This final stand marked the end of the Thunder Warriors as a fighting force, their sacrifices quietly buried in the annals of Imperial history. In the aftermath, the Emperor began the process of replacing the Thunder Warriors with a new generation of genetically engineered warriors, the Adeptus Astartes, or Space Marines. Unlike their predecessors, the Space Marines were designed with the long-term vision of the Imperium in mind. They were more refined, disciplined, and genetically stable, embodying the ideals of the Emperor's imperial truth. The Thunder Warriors, by contrast, were deliberately consigned to obscurity, their existence erased from official records to preserve the mythos of the Emperor's infallible plan. Yet, for those who uncover the hidden truths of the Unification Wars, the Thunder Warriors remain a grim reminder of the price of unification and the brutal measures the Emperor was willing to take to forge his empire. The vision of the Imperium was the Emperor's magnum opus, a grand and sweeping plan to secure humanity's survival and dominance across the galaxy. Emerging from the chaos of the Age of Strife, the Emperor saw firsthand the devastation wrought by humanity's ignorance, fragmentation, and dependence on forces beyond their understanding. He believed that only through unity, guided by reason and science, could mankind overcome the perils of the galaxy and ascend to its rightful place as the galaxy's preeminent species. His vision for the Imperium was not merely a political or military ambition. It was a total reformation of human civilization, driven by his profound understanding of humanity's potential and its vulnerabilities. Central to the Emperor's vision was the unification of humanity under a single banner. For too long, mankind had been scattered across countless worlds, isolated by warp storms and divided by cultural, technological, and ideological differences. These divisions left humanity vulnerable to external threats, such as xenos predators and internal decay, as worlds succumbed to anarchy, superstition, and self-destruction. The Emperor sought to end this fragmentation by establishing the Imperium of Man, a galactic empire that would encompass all human-settled worlds. Under this unified structure, humanity would be protected by the imperial military, governed by a centralized authority, and uplifted through technological and cultural renaissance. The Emperor's motivations were deeply rooted in his disdain for superstition and the reliance on the warp, both of which he saw as existential threats to humanity. The Age of Strife had shown him the destructive potential of warp phenomena and the dangers posed by psychers who lack control or understanding of their powers. Warp storms had severed human worlds from one another, while uncontrolled psychers had caused widespread devastation, from planetary annihilation to societal collapse. Furthermore, the emergence of chaos, with its insidious influence over the weak and the desperate, represented a direct and unparalleled threat to humanity's existence. To combat these dangers, the Emperor sought to wean humanity off its dependence on the warp and its belief in gods or other supernatural forces. He believed that reason, science, and human ingenuity could provide all the answers humanity needed. At the heart of the Imperium was the imperial truth, the emperor's philosophical doctrine that rejected religion, superstition, and mysticism in favor of rationality and empirical knowledge. The imperial truth declared that humanity needed no gods, for it was its own master and architect of its destiny. By spreading this doctrine, the emperor aimed to create a society where progress and reason would prevail, unshackled from the chains of ignorance that had plagued humanity for millennia. The imperial truth was also a direct countermeasure against the growing threat of chaos, which thrived on faith, fear, and irrational belief. By eliminating the spiritual vulnerabilities that chaos exploited, the emperor hoped to shield humanity from its corrupting influence. However, the emperor understood that unifying humanity and imposing the imperial truth would not be a peaceful or easy process. Many human worlds had developed their own religions, cultures, and traditions during the Age of Strife, and few would willingly abandon these beliefs. To achieve his vision, the emperor knew he would have to rely on conquest and force. The Great Crusade, the massive military campaign to reunite humanity's scattered worlds, was the practical realization of this plan. Led by the emperor and his genetically engineered primarchs, the Great Crusade was as much a war against ignorance and division as it was a campaign of military unification. Worlds that accepted the emperor's rule peacefully were integrated into the Imperium, while those that resisted were subjected to brutal conquest. The emperor's disdain for the warp extended to humanity's technological development as well. During the dark age of technology, humanity had relied heavily on warp-based technologies, such as faster-than-light travel and communication. While these advancements had enabled humanity's initial expansion across the stars, they had also left it vulnerable to warp-related disasters and interference. The Emperor sought to replace these technologies with more stable and less dangerous alternatives. One of his most ambitious projects was the construction of the Webway Project, an attempt to grant humanity access to the ancient, stable network of tunnels that the Eldar used to traverse the galaxy. By creating a human-accessible webway, the Emperor hoped to eliminate humanity's reliance on the warp for travel and communication, thereby reducing its exposure to the dangers of chaos. Despite the scope and nobility of the Emperor's vision, it was not without its flaws and contradictions. While he sought to eradicate superstition, his own existence was shrouded in mystery and myth. To many, the Emperor himself appeared godlike, a figure of immense power and unfathomable wisdom who could perform feats that defied natural explanation. This contradiction would later become a critical point of contention, as the Imperium's rejection of religion conflicted with the growing cults that worshipped the Emperor as a divine being. Furthermore, the Emperor's reliance on conquest and authoritarian rule to enforce his vision created resentment and rebellion among those who felt oppressed or alienated by the Imperium's rigid structure. Ultimately, the Emperor's vision for the Imperium was both a reflection of his unmatched intellect and his pragmatic understanding of humanity's flaws. He saw the potential for humanity to rise above its limitations and become a dominant force in the galaxy, but he also recognized that this potential could only be realized through ruthless and uncompromising action. The Imperium of man, as he envisioned it, was not a utopia, but a means of ensuring humanity's survival and dominance in an unforgiving galaxy. Whether his vision could have been fully realized under different circumstances remains one of the great unanswered questions of the Warhammer 40K universe, but its impact on humanity's destiny is undeniable. The Imperium, for all its flaws and contradictions, stands as a testament to the Emperor's ambition and the price of his pursuit of unity and enlightenment. Under the framework of the Emperor's grand vision, the next pivotal step in securing humanity's destiny was the creation of the Primarchs. The Great Crusade, while a monumental effort, demanded not only the strength of vast armies, but also the leadership of individuals who could embody the Emperor's ideals and carry his will across the galaxy. The Thunder Warriors had proven effective, but ultimately flawed, and the nascent Space Marines, while formidable, required leaders who could inspire, strategize, and unify on a level far beyond the capabilities of any ordinary human or enhanced soldier. Thus, the Primarch Project was born, representing the culmination of the Emperor's unparalleled expertise in genetics and bioengineering. The Primarchs were not mere soldiers or commanders. They were intended to be paragons of humanity, embodiments of perfection, designed to lead the Emperor's forces and govern the vast realms of the Imperium. Each Primarch was a blend of the Emperor's own genetic material and specialized enhancements tailored to specific traits. They were created to be larger, stronger, and more intelligent than any human, with lifespans that could stretch across millennia. Beyond their physical and intellectual prowess, they were imbued with a presence that commanded awe and loyalty, an almost supernatural charisma that made them natural leaders. In essence, the Primarchs were living embodiments of the Emperor's vision for what humanity could aspire to become: uncompromising, unyielding, and utterly dedicated to the cause of unification. The process of creating the Primarchs took place in the secret laboratories beneath the Himalayan mountains on Terra, a site known as the Imperial Palace. Here, the Emperor worked tirelessly to perfect his creations, incorporating genetic techniques and technologies that drew upon humanity's long-lost knowledge from the dark age of technology. Every detail was meticulously planned, and the project represented the pinnacle of his scientific and intellectual capabilities. Each Primarch was to be a distinct individual with unique traits, temperaments, and abilities, ensuring that together they could tackle the diverse challenges of the Great Crusade. Whether it was the tactical genius of a master strategist or the unrelenting drive of an indomitable warrior, the Primarchs were crafted to excel in all aspects of leadership and warfare. Yet, as with many of the Emperor's grand plans, the Primarch Project did not unfold as intended. Before the Primarchs could fully mature and take their place at the forefront of the Great Crusade, disaster struck. The ruinous powers of chaos, ever vigilant for opportunities to undermine the Emperor's work, intervened in a catastrophic act of sabotage. In an event shrouded in mystery and conjecture, the gestation pods housing the developing Primarchs were scattered across the galaxy, flung through the warp to worlds far and wide. Each Primarch, still an infant, landed on a different planet, their fates and futures shaped by the cultures, environments, and circumstances of their new homes. The scattering of the Primarchs was a devastating blow to the Emperor's plans, as these perfect creations were now beyond his reach. However, the Emperor, ever pragmatic and determined, adapted to this unforeseen challenge. The Great Crusade continued, and as the Emperor's forces expanded outward into the galaxy, the search for the lost Primarchs became a central mission. Over time, these scattered suns were rediscovered one by one, each shaped by the unique circumstances of their upbringing. Some had risen to positions of great power on their adopted worlds, ruling as kings, warlords, or revered leaders. Others had endured harsh struggles, their resilience forged in the crucible of adversity. Each reunion was a moment of triumph as the Emperor welcomed his wayward sons back into the fold and assigned them command of their corresponding Legiones Astartes, Space Marine legions created from their genetic templates. The scattering of the Primarchs, while tragic, added an unexpected layer of complexity to their identities and relationships. The environments and cultures of their adopted worlds profoundly influenced their personalities, values, and perspectives. While they shared a common origin and purpose, their individual experiences often led to differences in ideology and approach. These differences, though initially a source of strength and diversity, would later sow the seeds of division that contributed to the tragic events of the Horus Heresy. The Primarch Project, despite its initial setbacks, ultimately fulfilled its purpose in enabling the Emperor to consolidate power and push forward with the Great Crusade. The Primarchs became the living embodiment of his vision for the Imperium, each contributing uniquely to the unification of humanity. However, their creation and subsequent scattering highlighted the fragility of even the Emperor's most well-laid plans in the face of the galaxy's chaotic and unpredictable forces. The story of the Primarchs is both a testament to the Emperor's genius and a somber reminder of the unintended consequences that would shape the fate of the Imperium for millennia to come. The Great Crusade was the Emperor's grand campaign to reunite the scattered remnants of humanity and restore the galaxy to human dominance. Following the horrors of the Age of Strife, where warp storms had severed interstellar communication and countless human colonies had descended into chaos, the galaxy was a fractured and hostile place. Entire worlds had regressed to barbarism or been enslaved by alien empires, while others had developed isolated civilizations entirely divorced from Terra's legacy. The Emperor, with Terra unified under his rule and the foundations of the Imperium established, launched the Great Crusade to reclaim humanity's destiny, bringing order, unity, and survival to the species. The Great Crusade was not merely a military endeavor, but an ideological one. It was designed to reunite humanity under the principles of the imperial truth, the Emperor's doctrine of secularism and reason. In the Emperor's vision, superstition, religion, and mysticism had no place in human society. They were relics of ignorance and sources of division that had led to the collapse of the old human civilizations. By imposing a unified government and a shared philosophy across the galaxy, the Emperor sought to create a harmonious and resilient Imperium that could withstand the myriad threats of the galaxy, from alien predators to the insidious corruption of chaos. Central to the Great Crusade were the Legiones Astartes, or Space Marine legions. These warriors, engineered from the genetic templates of the Primarchs, were the Emperor's ultimate instruments of conquest and unification. Each Space Marine was a living weapon, far superior to any human soldier in strength, resilience, and combat ability. Their enhanced physiology allowed them to endure the harshest environments, heal from grievous wounds, and outlast any enemy in battle. Organized into 20 legions, each led by a Primarch, the Astartes became the spearhead of the crusade, their loyalty to the Emperor and their genetic fathers ensuring the cohesion and effectiveness of the campaign. The Astartes were designed not only to conquer, but also to inspire. Their presence on the battlefield was often enough to break the morale of enemy forces, as their towering, armored forms and unrelenting discipline seemed almost godlike. However, they were more than just warriors. They were the agents of the Emperor's will, tasked with enforcing the imperial truth on newly compliant worlds. Whether through diplomacy or overwhelming force, the Space Marines ensured that the Emperor's vision was implemented across every corner of the galaxy. The Great Crusade's scale was unprecedented. Fleets of ships, some the size of small cities, carried millions of soldiers, engineers, and administrators across the stars. Exploratory fleets sought out lost human colonies, encountering both allies and enemies. Some worlds, upon learning of the Emperor's mission, willingly joined the Imperium, offering their loyalty and resources to the great cause. These compliant worlds were integrated into the growing Imperium, their cultures and economies adapted to serve the larger galactic framework. Others resisted, either due to entrenched ideologies, alliances with xenospecies, or the corrupting influence of chaos. These worlds faced the full might of the Emperor's forces, their resistance crushed under the relentless advance of the legions. The challenges faced during the Great Crusade were as diverse as the galaxy itself. Some worlds had devolved into primitive states where humanity had forgotten its origins and the advanced technologies of the past. These planets required not just conquest, but education and reconstruction to bring them into the fold. Others had developed powerful civilizations that rivaled or even surpassed the technological sophistication of the Imperium. In these cases, the Emperor's forces often faced prolonged and bloody campaigns, as such societies were rarely willing to submit to external rule. Additionally, the galaxy was rife with alien empires, from the barbaric orcs to the manipulative Eldar. These Xenos species, seen as threats to humanity's survival, were eradicated wherever they were encountered. The rediscovery of the Primarchs during the Great Crusade was a defining aspect of the campaign. Each Primarch, scattered across the galaxy by the intervention of chaos, had grown into a figure of immense power and influence on their adopted worlds. When the Emperor reunited with his lost sons, he welcomed them back into the fold and placed them at the head of their respective legions. The Primarchs became the faces of the Crusade, their leadership and charisma galvanizing the legions and bringing a sense of unity to the sprawling campaign. Each Primarch brought their own unique perspective and abilities to the Crusade, shaping the character of their legion and the manner in which they pursued the Emperor's objectives. While the Great Crusade was a time of monumental progress and achievement, it was not without its costs. The relentless pace of conquest placed immense strain on the Imperium's resources and logistics, and the integration of newly compliant worlds often required brutal measures. Entire populations were displaced or exterminated if they refused to abandon their beliefs or practices in favor of the imperial truth. The Astartes, for all their loyalty and efficiency, were often perceived as cold and tyrannical by the people they conquered, fostering resentment and rebellion in some cases. Additionally, the seeds of future discord were sown as differences in ideology and approach began to emerge among the Primarchs and their legions. Despite these challenges, the Great Crusade stands as one of the most significant periods in human history. It marked the transition from the fractured remnants of the Age of Strife to the unified Imperium of man, a galactic empire that, for all its flaws, ensured humanity's survival in an unforgiving galaxy. The Emperor's vision, carried out through the tireless efforts of the Space Marine legions and their Primarchs, brought order to chaos and re-established humanity as a dominant force among the stars. Yet, even as the Crusade reached its zenith, shadows loomed on the horizon, as the very unity it sought to establish would soon be tested by betrayal and conflict on an unimaginable scale. The rediscovery of the Primarchs was a defining moment in the Great Crusade and a key milestone in the Emperor's quest to unify humanity under his rule. Each of these genetically engineered superhumans, scattered across the galaxy by the dark machinations of chaos, had grown to maturity in isolation, shaped by the unique cultures, environments, and challenges of their adopted worlds. As the Emperor's forces pushed further into the galaxy, one by one, these lost sons were found and brought back into the fold. Their return was heralded as both a triumph and a test, for while the Primarchs were vital to the success of the Great Crusade, their individuality and personal experiences often clashed with the rigid vision the Emperor held for humanity's future. The Emperor's relationship with his Primarchs was complex, defined by a blend of paternal affection, strategic necessity, and underlying tension. He referred to them as his sons, and in many ways, they were. Each Primarch had been created using his own genetic material, blended with unique enhancements to make them paragons of leadership and ability. However, this familial bond was tempered by the Emperor's pragmatism. To him, the Primarches were not just sons, but also tools to execute his grand plan. They were generals to lead his Space Marine legions, icons to inspire loyalty, and administrators to govern the vast territories of the Imperium. While the Emperor undoubtedly valued and cared for his creations, his ultimate focus remained on the broader goal of unifying humanity, sometimes at the expense of the personal connections he might have formed with his sons. Each Primarch, upon being rediscovered, was placed in command of the Space Marine Legion that had been created from their genetic template. These reunions were often joyous occasions, as the Emperor welcomed his sons back into the fold and introduced them to their waiting legions. However, the differences in upbringing and ideology that had emerged during their years of isolation soon became apparent. Some Primarchs, such as Robut Guilliman of Ultramar and Sanguinius of Baal, embraced the Emperor's vision wholeheartedly, integrating seamlessly into the structure of the Great Crusade. Others, like Angron of Nuceria or Perturabo of Olympia, struggled to reconcile their personal experiences and grievances with the demands placed upon them. The unique circumstances of each Primarch's upbringing shaped their personalities, values, and approaches to leadership. Some, like Horus Lupercal, who had been discovered early in the Crusade, and raised closely under the emperor's guidance, developed a deep bond with their creator and a strong sense of loyalty. Others, who had endured hardship, betrayal, or isolation on their adopted worlds, harbored resentment or mistrust toward the emperor. This disparity in experiences created a dynamic of both camaraderie and rivalry among the Primarchs. While they shared a common purpose in serving the Imperium, their differing perspectives often led to ideological clashes and strained relationships. The seeds of dissent were sown early in these interactions. The Emperor's decision to withhold certain truths about the nature of the warp, chaos, and even his own plans for the Webway project created an undercurrent of mistrust. While the Emperor's intentions were to shield his sons and the Imperium from the corrupting influence of chaos, this secrecy inadvertently fueled feelings of alienation and frustration among some of the Primarchs. Additionally, the Emperor's focus on the broader vision of unification sometimes left individual Primarchs feeling undervalued or misunderstood. The sense that they were mere tools rather than cherished sons became a point of contention, particularly for those Primarchs who had endured hardship or perceived slights from their creator. Horus, the War Master, and the Emperor's chosen heir was perhaps the most poignant example of this dynamic. Initially, the Emperor's most loyal and capable son, Horus, was elevated above his brothers to lead the Great Crusade in the Emperor's stead when the Emperor retired to Terra to focus on the Webway project. While this honor cemented Horus's position as the Emperor's favored son, it also placed immense pressure on him and stoked the jealousy and resentment of his brothers. This combination of external expectations and internal divisions created a fertile ground for manipulation, paving the way for chaos to corrupt Horus and turn him against his father. The imperfections in the Emperor's relationship with his sons extended beyond personal dynamics to the broader structure of the Imperium. While the Primarchs were instrumental in the success of the Great Crusade, their individualism and the rivalries between their legions created fractures that would later widen into irreparable schisms. The Emperor, in his desire to control and direct humanity's future, underestimated the impact of the Primarchs' unique personalities and experiences. This oversight would prove catastrophic, as the growing tensions among the Primarchs and their differing interpretations of the Emperor's vision ultimately led to the Horus Heresy, the greatest betrayal in the history of the Imperium. In hindsight, the Primarchs were both the Emperor's greatest achievement and his greatest vulnerability. They were designed to embody the best of humanity and lead it to glory, yet their individuality and emotional complexities made them susceptible to manipulation and discord. The Emperor's imperfect relationship with his sons, marked by both love and pragmatism, was a microcosm of the challenges inherent in his grand vision for the Imperium. While the Primarchs played an essential role in the successes of the Great Crusade, their rediscovery and eventual descent underscored the fragility of even the most carefully laid plans in a galaxy rife with chaos and unpredictability. The Horus Heresy was the catastrophic turning point in the Emperor's vision for humanity, a betrayal so profound that it plunged the Imperium into a civil war that nearly destroyed everything achieved during the Great Crusade. It began with Horus Lupercal, the Emperor's most beloved and trusted Primarch, who succumbed to the insidious whispers of the Chaos Gods. Horus once a shining example of loyalty, strength, and leadership, was manipulated into believing that the Emperor had betrayed his sons and sought to enslave humanity for his own purposes. This twisting of Horus's perspective became the foundation of a rebellion that shattered the unity of the Imperium and turned brother against brother on an unimaginable scale. Horus's fall was not a sudden or simple event, but a culmination of underlying tensions and carefully orchestrated schemes as the Emperor withdrew to Terra to focus on his secret webway project. He left the Great Crusade in Horus's hands, appointing him as War Master. This elevation marked Horus as the Emperor's chosen heir and the most trusted of the Primarchs, but it also isolated him. The jealousy and resentment of some of his brothers, combined with the immense pressures of leadership, left Horus vulnerable to manipulation. The Chaos Gods, ever watchful for opportunities to undermine the Emperor, saw in Horus the perfect tool to disrupt the Imperium. They recognized that turning the War Master, the very heart of the Emperor's war machine, would have devastating repercussions. The critical moment came during a campaign on the planet Davin. Horus was grievously wounded in battle, and his life hung by a thread. In his weakened state, his advisors, many of whom were already under the influence of chaos, brought him to a temple dedicated to the ruinous powers. There, Horus underwent a ritual that exposed him to the lies and promises of chaos. The visions he received painted the Emperor as a tyrant who sought to abandon the Primarchs and consolidate power for himself. These falsehoods preyed on Horus's insecurities and feelings of abandonment, convincing him that he, not the Emperor, should lead humanity. By the time the ritual was complete, Horus had pledged himself to chaos, believing he could create a new order free from the constraints of his father's vision. Once turned, Horus began his insidious work. Using his charisma and authority, he sowed dissent among his brothers, identifying those Primarchs who harbored grievances or could be swayed by promises of power. Primarchs like Angron, Fulgrim, and Perturabo, each burdened by their own bitterness and struggles, joined Horus in his rebellion. These traitorous sons, along with their legions, turned against the Emperor, forming a coalition dedicated to overthrowing the Imperium. This rebellion was not merely a military uprising, but an ideological war. Horus portrayed himself as a liberator, offering his followers a vision of an Imperium free from the Emperor's authoritarian rule, though in truth he was a pawn of the Chaos Gods, driven by their malevolent agenda. The Horus Heresy began in earnest with the Istvan III atrocity, where Horus tested the loyalty of his forces. Loyalist elements within the traitor legions were purged in a brutal orbital bombardment, leaving no room for dissent among his followers. This massacre was the first open act of the heresy, signaling to the galaxy that the Imperium was now at war with itself. Following Istvan III, the rebellion escalated, with Horus launching a coordinated campaign against the Emperor's loyalists. The galaxy, once united under the banner of the Great Crusade, was torn apart as brother fought brother, and entire worlds burned in the fires of betrayal. The Emperor, recognizing the scale of the threat, mobilized his loyal sons and legions to counter the rebellion. Primarchs like Robuta Gilliman, Lionel Johnson, and Sanguinius led the defense of the Imperium, rallying their forces to confront Horus's advance. The conflict spread across the galaxy, consuming countless lives and resources. Worlds that had been reclaimed during the Great Crusade were now battlegrounds, their populations caught in the crossfire of a war that defied comprehension. The ideals of unity and progress that had defined the Imperium were overshadowed by the brutality and destruction of civil war. Horus's betrayal was not just a physical rebellion, but a spiritual one as well. Chaos, long lurking in the shadows of humanity's history, now emerged as a direct and undeniable threat. The ruinous powers used the heresy to spread their influence, corrupting not only the traitor legions, but also countless individuals across the Imperium. The very fabric of the Emperor's vision was being unraveled, as faith in the imperial truth faltered, and fear and desperation took hold. The Horus Heresy would rage for 7 years, culminating in the climactic siege of Terra, where Horus and his traitor forces laid siege to the imperial palace itself. The war would leave an indelible scar on the Imperium, forever changing the course of human history. Yet, the seeds of this great betrayal were planted long before the first shots were fired, in the cracks and tensions that had emerged among the Primarchs and their relationship with the Emperor. Horus's fall was the tragic result of ambition, manipulation, and mistrust, a perfect storm that turned the Emperor's most trusted son into his greatest enemy and brought the Imperium to the brink of destruction. The galaxy-wide devastation of the Horus Heresy reached its grim crescendo with the siege of Terra, a battle of unimaginable scale and significance that brought the conflict directly to the throne world itself. The Imperium, once united under the Emperor's vision, was now a shattered and burning remnant of what it had been during the Great Crusade. Horus, consumed by his hatred and the dark influence of chaos, had led his traitor forces in a relentless campaign toward Terra, intending to strike at the heart of the Imperium and confront the Emperor face to face. The traitor legions, emboldened by their dark patrons, sought nothing less than the total annihilation of the Emperor's dream and the ascension of chaos as the ultimate power in the galaxy. Terra, the cradle of humanity and the seat of the Emperor's power, had been prepared for this inevitable assault. Its defenses were among the strongest in the galaxy, bolstered by layers of void shields, orbital platforms, and the indomitable presence of the Imperial Palace, a sprawling fortress of immeasurable scale. Loyalist forces, drawn from the remaining uncorrupted Space Marine legions, the Imperial Army, and the Adeptus Custodes, stood ready to defend their homeworld to the last. Primarchs such as Rogel Dorn and Sanguinius took command of the defenses, using their strategic brilliance and unwavering resolve to hold the line against the overwhelming tide of traitor forces. Horus's fleet arrived in orbit, a vast and menacing armada that included countless warships and transports carrying the combined might of his traitorous legions. The Death Guard, World Eaters, Sons of Horus, and other corrupted factions poured their forces onto the planet, breaching Terra's outer defenses in a storm of fire and blood. The traitors were relentless, deploying siege engines, demonic monstrosities, and warp sorcery to overwhelm the defenders. The skies burned with the fire of orbital bombardments, and the ground shook beneath the thunderous advance of tanks and infantry. Every inch of Terra became a battleground, from the rubble-strewn streets of its cities to the ruined landscapes beyond. The Imperial Palace itself became the focal point of the siege, as wave after wave of traitor forces hurled themselves at its walls. Rogel Dorn's meticulous fortifications turned every approach into a killing ground, but the sheer numbers of the attackers began to take their toll. Sanguinius, his angelic presence and inspiration to the defenders, fought valiantly alongside his blood angels, holding back the tide in some of the fiercest and most desperate battles of the siege. The Custodes, the Emperor's personal guard, fought with unmatched ferocity, knowing that the fate of the Imperium rested on their shoulders. Despite their heroism, the traitors pushed ever closer, their dark sorcery and brutal tactics threatening to breach the final sanctuaries of the imperial palace. Horus, aware that time was running out and that loyalist reinforcements led by Robut Guilliman were en route, made a fateful decision. Lowering the shields of his flagship, the Vengeful Spirit, he issued a challenge to the Emperor, daring him to face him in single combat. This act was not only a tactical gambit, but a display of hubris and defiance, as Horus sought to prove his superiority over the father he now despised. The Emperor, realizing that the war could not be won through prolonged defense alone, accepted the challenge. Accompanied by Sanguinius and a select retinue, he teleported aboard the Vengeful Spirit to confront his fallen son and bring an end to the conflict. Aboard the Vengeful Spirit, the Emperor and his companions faced a hellish gauntlet of corrupted warriors and demonic abominations. Sanguinius, ever the noble and selfless warrior, fought his way to Horus's throne room, only to find himself face to face with his corrupted brother. In a tragic and brutal confrontation, Sanguinius fell, his life ended by Horus in a display of raw power and cruelty. Yet, even in his death, the angelic Primarch left an indelible mark, striking a blow that weakened Horus and gave the Emperor the opening he needed. The final confrontation between the Emperor and Horus was a battle of epic proportions, one that would determine the fate of humanity. Horus, empowered by the Chaos Gods, wielded unimaginable strength and sorcery, his form a grotesque blend of man and demon. The Emperor, though unmatched in his psychic might and martial skill, fought not just against his son, but against the combined will of the ruinous powers. The clash shook the very fabric of the warp and reality, as father and son, creator and betrayer, unleashed their full fury upon one another. In the end, the Emperor triumphed, though the cost was immeasurable. In a moment of clarity, the Emperor saw a fragment of the son he had once loved, buried beneath the layers of corruption and hatred. Hesitating, he gave Horus a final chance to relent, but the War Master struck again, his intent to destroy his father, unwavering. Forced to act, the Emperor unleashed a devastating psychic attack, obliterating Horus's soul so utterly that even the Chaos Gods could not resurrect him. The War Master was no more, but the Emperor himself was mortally wounded, his body broken, and his spirit drained by the exertion. The Emperor's attendants, led by the tech priest Dominus and Rogel Dorn, retrieved his shattered form and returned it to Terra. There, he was interred upon the golden throne, a life support device that sustained his body and allowed his psychic presence to endure, guiding the Imperium and maintaining the Astronomicon. The siege of Terra had ended, but the cost was staggering. The Imperium was saved, but it would never be the same. The Emperor's dream of unity and enlightenment lay in ruins, replaced by an empire ruled by faith, bureaucracy, and the shadow of endless war. The siege of Terra marked not just the end of the Horus Heresy, but the beginning of the Imperium's long, grim struggle for survival in the darkness of the 41st millennium. The Emperor's ultimate sacrifice during the Siege of Terra marked the pivotal moment in the history of the Imperium, a bittersweet victory that ensured humanity's survival at an unfathomable cost. After the brutal confrontation with Horus aboard the Vengeful Spirit, the Emperor emerged victorious, but the price of that victory was his own physical destruction. The Emperor's mortal wounding and his subsequent entombment upon the Golden Throne would forever define the nature of the Imperium he had built, transforming him from a living ruler into a symbol of divine protection and sacrifice. The confrontation between the Emperor and Horus had been the culmination of decades of betrayal and war. Empowered by the Chaos Gods, Horus was a force of unimaginable power, his very presence radiating corruption and malice. The Emperor, though the most powerful psyker humanity had ever known, faced not only his son's strength, but the combined will of the ruinous powers. Their battle was cataclysmic, a clash of titans that shattered the very structure of the Vengeful Spirit. The Emperor fought not just with his immense psychic might, but with the sorrow of a father forced to destroy his most beloved son. In their final moments, the Emperor, seeing a fleeting glimpse of the man Horus had once been, hesitated, offering him one last chance to repent. Horus, now wholly consumed by chaos, rejected this offer and struck the Emperor with a blow of devastating power, grievously wounding him. Realizing there was no hope for redemption, the Emperor unleashed his full psychic fury, annihilating Horus's soul so completely that even the Chaos Gods could not reclaim it. With that act, the War Master was utterly destroyed, and the immediate threat to Terra was ended. However, the toll on the Emperor was catastrophic. His body was broken, his once vibrant psychic energy drained to the brink of extinguishment. Loyalist forces, led by Rogel Dorn, discovered his shattered form amid the ruins of the Vengeful Spirit and brought him back to Terra with desperate urgency. The Emperor's followers understood that without him, the Imperium would collapse. The Emperor had not only been its ruler, but also its unifying symbol and the source of the Astronomicon, the psychic beacon that made interstellar travel possible. Without his guidance and power, humanity would be lost, vulnerable to the predations of Xenos empires and the ever-looming threat of chaos. To preserve his presence, the Emperor was placed upon the Golden Throne, a life support device originally designed to interface with the Webway project. The machine, hastily repurposed by the Adeptus Mechanicus, sustained his failing body and allowed his psychic essence to remain active, albeit at great cost. The Golden Throne became both a salvation and a prison. The Emperor's physical form was now little more than a husk, sustained by countless psychic sacrifices made daily by the Adeptus Astronomica to fuel the machine's immense power requirements. Yet, in this state of perpetual suffering, the Emperor continued to serve humanity. His psychic presence anchored the Astronomicon, guiding countless ships safely through the warp and enabling the Imperium's vast interstellar empire to function. He also acted as a bulwark against the forces of chaos, his immense psychic will suppressing demonic incursions and shielding humanity from the full fury of the warp. The Emperor's sacrifice, while ensuring the survival of the Imperium, marked the end of the dream he had worked so tirelessly to achieve. His vision of a unified, rational humanity, free from superstition and guided by reason, was replaced by a grim, stagnant empire that worshipped him as a god. The imperial cult, which he had sought to suppress during his lifetime, now rose to dominance, with the emperor revered as the divine protector of humanity. This shift in ideology created an imperium rife with dogma, bureaucracy, and paranoia, far removed from the enlightened society the emperor had envisioned. The physical and psychic toll of sustaining the emperor on the golden throne is immense. Every day, thousands of psychers are sacrificed to feed the machine, their souls consumed to keep the emperor's flickering essence alive. Despite this, his power wanes, and the golden throne itself is in a state of gradual decay. The Adeptus Mechanicus struggles to maintain it, lacking the full understanding of its ancient technologies. The emperor's loyal subjects cling to the belief that he continues to guide and protect them, yet whispers persist of a slow decline, a waning light in the endless darkness of the galaxy. The emperor's sacrifice on the golden throne was both a triumph and a tragedy. It preserved the Imperium in its darkest hour, allowing humanity to endure in the face of overwhelming threats. Yet it also signaled the loss of the emperor's direct leadership and the corruption of his ideals. The Imperium he left behind is a shadow of his original vision, a grim and oppressive regime sustained by faith, fear, and the constant vigilance of its countless defenders. The Emperor's eternal vigil on the Golden Throne is a stark reminder of the cost of survival in a galaxy consumed by war and chaos, a price paid by a godlike figure who gave everything to protect a species that may never fully understand or honor his sacrifice. The Golden Throne became both the Emperor's prison and humanity's lifeline, a grim monument to his sacrifice and the Imperium's enduring survival. After the catastrophic events of the Siege of Terra and his mortal wounding during the battle with Horus, the Emperor's shattered body was placed upon this arcane life support device. Originally intended to serve as the central mechanism for the Webway project, the Golden Throne was hastily repurposed to preserve what remained of the Emperor's physical form and psychic essence. It now stands as the most sacred and guarded artifact in the galaxy, the beating heart of the Imperium and the source of its continued existence. Bound to the throne, the Emperor endures an eternity of unimaginable suffering. His body is lifeless, reduced to a withered husk, sustained only by the arcane mechanisms of the device and the daily sacrifice of thousands of psychers whose souls are consumed to fuel its energy requirements. Yet, his mind persists, stretched across the immaterium and material space, anchoring the Astronomicon, the psychic beacon that guides Imperial ships safely through the warp. Without this beacon, interstellar travel across the vast expanse of the Imperium would become impossible, and the entire empire would collapse into chaos. The Emperor's unyielding will and immense psychic power are the only forces preventing the Imperium's complete disintegration. In his shattered state, the Emperor's role has evolved far beyond that of a ruler or a general. For the people of the Imperium, he is no longer just the Emperor. He is the God Emperor, a divine protector and savior whose sacrifice secures humanity's continued survival. This transformation was not of the Emperor's design. In life, he had vehemently opposed superstition and religion, championing reason and the imperial truth. However, in the wake of the Horus Heresy, The shattered Imperium needed more than a ruler. It needed a symbol of hope and unity. The ecclesiarchy, seizing upon this need, elevated the emperor to the status of a god, cementing his image as the divine figurehead of the imperial cult. For the countless billions of imperial citizens, the emperor is a god in every sense of the word. His visage adorns cathedrals and banners across the galaxy, and his name is invoked in prayers, oaths, and battle cries. The cult of the god emperor has become the foundation of the Imperium's spiritual and social structure, providing a unifying faith in a galaxy rife with fear and uncertainty. To the faithful, the Emperor is an omnipotent and omniscient being who watches over humanity from the Golden Throne, guiding its every action and shielding it from the horrors of the warp. Entire orders of priests and warriors, such as the Adepta Sororitas and the Ecclesiarchy itself, devote their lives to his worship and service. Yet, this transformation from man to God comes with profound consequences. The imperial cult, while unifying, has also entrenched dogma, superstition, and stagnation within the Imperium. The Emperor's original vision of a rational and enlightened humanity has been replaced by a theocratic regime that reveres him as a deity. Scientific progress is suppressed, innovation is seen as heretical, and countless atrocities are committed in his name, all justified as acts of devotion to the god emperor. The truth of his human origins, his rejection of divinity, and his vision for humanity's ascension through reason and unity have been buried beneath centuries of religious fervor and institutionalized faith. The Golden Throne itself, despite its role as humanity's lifeline, is a precarious construct. Its mechanisms, dating back to the dark age of technology, are incomprehensibly advanced, and the Adeptus Mechanicus struggles to maintain them. The device is in a state of gradual decay, with each passing millennium increasing the risk of catastrophic failure. If the Golden Throne were to falter, the consequences would be apocalyptic. The Astronomicon would cease to function, warp travel would collapse, and the Imperium would be plunged into chaos, unable to defend itself against Xenos threats or the encroaching forces of chaos. In his eternal suffering, the Emperor remains a paradox, a man who rejected divinity, now revered as a god, a ruler who sought to eliminate superstition, now the center of a galaxy-spanning theocracy, a being of unmatched power and intellect, now trapped in a prison of his own creation. His presence on the Golden Throne is both the Imperium's salvation and its greatest limitation, ensuring humanity's survival at the cost of its potential. The Emperor's eternal vigil stands as a stark reminder of the sacrifices required to preserve an empire in a galaxy consumed by darkness, and of the tragic cost of a vision that could never fully be realized. In the shadow of the Golden Throne, humanity endures, its faith in the God Emperor unshaken, even as the cracks in the foundation of the Imperium grow ever wider. The legacy of the Emperor is as vast and complex as the Imperium itself, a mixture of triumph, tragedy, and unanswered questions that define humanity's existence in the 41st millennium. The Emperor's influence permeates every aspect of the Imperium, from its towering Gothic architecture and rigid bureaucratic institutions to the very hearts of its citizens, who worship him as a divine protector. His vision of a unified humanity has endured the millennia, yet it has been twisted and reshaped by the realities of survival in a hostile galaxy. What remains is an Imperium that owes its existence to the Emperor's sacrifice, but struggles under the weight of the contradictions his legacy has created. The most immediate and visible aspect of the Emperor's legacy is the imperial cult, the galaxy-spanning religion that venerates him as the God Emperor of mankind. Though the Emperor himself rejected the notion of divinity and sought to lead humanity through reason and enlightenment, the horrors of the Horus Heresy and the desperate need for unity transformed him into a figure of worship. Across the Imperium, countless billions offer prayers to the Emperor, seeking his guidance and protection in a galaxy consumed by war and darkness. For many, this faith is the only source of hope in a life marked by hardship and fear, and it provides the cultural and spiritual cohesion necessary to hold the Imperium together. Yet, this worship has also led to stagnation and oppression. The imperial cult, with its strict dogma and intolerance of dissent, suppresses innovation and progress, branding anything that deviates from its teachings as heresy. The bureaucracy of the ecclesiarchy enforces this orthodoxy with an iron hand, ensuring that the Imperium remains locked in a cycle of ritual and tradition. Science has been replaced by superstition, and the pursuit of knowledge is stifled by the fear of unleashing forbidden technologies or attracting the attention of chaos. The Emperor's original vision of a rational and advancing humanity has been replaced by a theocratic state that values blind faith over critical thought, a bitter irony that underscores the cost of his sacrifice. Despite these flaws, the Emperor's legacy has ensured humanity's survival in a galaxy that would otherwise have consumed it. The Imperium, for all its faults, is a bastion of order in a universe defined by chaos and predation. The Emperor's psychic presence, maintained through the Golden Throne, anchors the Astronomicon, allowing interstellar travel and communication to continue. His sacrifice has kept the forces of chaos at bay, preventing the warp from overwhelming the material universe. Without the Emperor, humanity would have been extinguished long ago, its scattered remnants devoured by Xenos empires or enslaved by the ruinous powers. The cost of this survival, however, is immense. The Imperium is a dystopian nightmare, its citizens ground down by unending wars, crushing labor, and the oppressive weight of its institutions. Billions live and die without ever knowing freedom, their lives dedicated to feeding the insatiable war machine that sustains the Imperium's endless conflicts. Entire worlds are sacrificed to maintain the Golden Throne, and the psychic toll of sustaining the Emperor's presence consumes countless lives every day. This grim reality raises the question of whether the Emperor's vision, even in its corrupted form, is worth the suffering it requires. The future of the Imperium remains uncertain. The Emperor's physical form is decaying, and the Golden Throne is in a state of gradual disrepair. The Adeptus Mechanicus, despite its efforts, struggles to maintain the ancient device, and rumors persist that it is failing. If the throne were to collapse, the consequences would be catastrophic, severing the Astronomicon and unleashing the full fury of the warp upon the material universe. At the same time, whispers of a possible resurrection or rebirth of the Emperor circulate among the faithful and the desperate, though such hopes are dismissed as heresy by the ecclesiarchy. Beyond the physical and spiritual dimensions of the Emperor's legacy lies the question of his ultimate vision. Did the Emperor truly believe humanity could achieve a galaxy-spanning utopia, or was his dream always tempered by the harsh realities of existence in an unforgiving universe? His decision to withhold the truth about chaos and his reliance on brutal methods to enforce compliance suggest a pragmatism that contrasts with the idealism often attributed to him. The Imperium, in its current form, is both a reflection of his triumphs and a reminder of his limitations. It endures, but at what cost? The Emperor's legacy is not just a story of what was achieved, but of what was lost. His vision of unity and progress has given way to a grim and stagnant empire, yet it is the only thing standing between humanity and annihilation. As the 41st millennium grinds on, the Imperium faces threats on all fronts, from the ravenous Tyranids and the ancient Necron dynasties to the insidious corruption of chaos and the relentless tide of orc wars. The galaxy teeters on the brink of collapse, and the question remains whether the Emperor's sacrifice will continue to sustain humanity, or if it will eventually falter, leaving the Imperium to face its end alone. In the end, the legacy of the Emperor is one of contradictions. He was a man who rejected divinity, yet he is worshipped as a god. He envisioned a future of enlightenment, yet his Imperium is defined by ignorance and repression. He sought to protect humanity, yet his methods have inflicted unimaginable suffering. The Emperor's influence will continue to shape the fate of the Imperium, for better or worse, as humanity struggles to survive in the unrelenting darkness of the galaxy. His sacrifice, both noble and tragic, remains the cornerstone of an empire that endures against all odds, a testament to the enduring strength and fragility of the human spirit.